Morning, grade 7. All right, so today's lesson is in a way a continuation of yesterday's lesson. So yesterday we focused on finding the part. Remember when they had that equation that the part equals the percent times whole? So yesterday focused on the part, and then today it's almost like a double lesson. We're going to find the percent or the whole. So we're actually going to be following the same steps and equations as yesterday's lesson. So what I want to point out to you is there's always going to be two different ways to solve for part, percent, and whole. The textbook outlines for you when to use which one. Doesn't mean that you can't use the other way, but the idea is that you learn to use both ways. So the first way is the equation, where you just do part equals percent times whole. The second way is using this proportion. Now, it is technically still an equation, right? Because we have that equals sign. But what we can do is we can set up this percent as something out of 100. So those are the two different ways we're going to be working on solving for percent and whole. So the first way is we're going to do find percent using an equation. That's way number 1. So here we have a question. What percent of 300 is 75? Now, anytime you approach one of these questions, grade 7, it's very important for you to understand what you're trying to find and what each number represents. So obviously, when it asks what percent, that's pretty straightforward. We're trying to find the percent. But now let's take a look at these numbers of 375. It says what percent of 300. So if I have 300, what percent of that is 75? So that means that my 300 is actually my whole, and my 75 is the part. Another way to think of it, grade 7, is that part is always equal to the percent. So if we say what percent of 300 is 75, the percent is the part, because it's important to know what's the whole and what's the part. So the percent is the part. So always look for the word percent and then look and go, okay, where does it say is? Because that will tell you what the part is. So because we've figured out what each of those numbers stand for, we can now fill in our equation. So I know that the 75 is the part, so I'm just going to plug in what I know. So 75 is the part, so I'm going to put it underneath the word part, equals the percent. I don't know what percent is. So remember, we're doing algebra, so whenever we don't know what a number is, we put in a letter. So I'm just going to put in the letter P. And then we know the whole number, which is 300. Now, think back to November, December when we were in person. Remember that I said there's different ways to write multiplication. So right now we have the letter P times 300. Another way I can write that is this, 300P. And then I'm going to keep my 75 the same. So that, grade 7, should sort of be an indicator to you, okay, if I have 300 of the letter P, how can I get that letter P by itself? How do I isolate the variable? Well, same questions apply. What's happening to P? It's being multiplied by 300. What's the opposite? Divide by 300. What you do to one side, you must, do to the other. This cancels out. So I end up with P all by itself. But now I need to figure out, well, what is 75 divided by 300? Because remember, I'm looking for a percent. So I'm just going to go to the side and do some long division. Remember, number on top goes on in the box. So I'm going to do 75 divided by 300 because I want to put this into decimal form to get it into percent form. So if I take a look, 300 does not fit into 7. It does not fit into 75. So I'm going to place a decimal and add a 0. Because I placed my decimal in the box, I need to place one above. Now I think, okay, how many times does 300 fit into 750? Twice. 2 times 300 is 600. Subtract. Bring down another 0. 300 fits into 1500. 5 times, because 5 times 3 is 15, and then I add the 2 zeros. So I now end up with 0.25, which is a decimal form of my percent. So then I need to think back a couple of days, how do I actually put that in percent form? Well, when I go from decimal to percent, I'm going to multiply by 100, which means move my decimal place to the right twice. So I end up with 25%. Again, you can think about that logically. Does it make sense that 75 is about a quarter of 300? Well, half of 300, which would be 50%, is 150, and then half of that again is 75. So that makes sense. But notice, grade 7, when I'm solving this way, I end up with a decimal that I need to convert to a percent. So during this lesson, you might actually need to refer back to the video a couple of times because I'm giving you one example for each way to solve. But sometimes we use decimals and sometimes we use the percent form. Okay, so that's example number 1. So now let's find a percent again, but this time we're going to find it using a proportion. So same thing, maybe even right when you look at your textbook, always think to yourself, what do I know? What am I trying to figure out? So this is my percent. That's what I'm trying to solve. But now, what's the whole and what's the part? Remember, the percent is the part. So we have this word is, the percent is 20. Well, not that the percent is 20, but it represents 20. So my part is 20, which leaves my whole being 50. What percent of 50 is 20? So it's basically saying, if I have this part of 20, what is that represented percent-wise? So now we're going to solve using a proportion. So we're still going to plug in what we know. Well, I know my part is 20 out of my whole, which is 50. But remember, when I solve using a proportion, I write my percent out of 100 because I know that. I know that my percent is out of 100. I just don't know what number goes on top there. Then using a proportion, we do cross products. So we get, I'm just going to do it over here, 20 times 100. Oops, I didn't leave myself enough room. I'm going to move over. 20 times 100, that's one of my cross products, equals 50 times P. So 20 times 100 gives me 2,000, and then I get 50P. So same thing as before. I'm going to use algebra. I want to get that letter P by itself, so I divide by 50 because that will cancel out. What I do to one side, I must do to the other. So now I end up with 2,000 divided by 50. Now I can do this in my head. I can think, okay, I can cross out a 0 from each side. I know that 5 fits into 120 times, so therefore 5 must fit into 240 times. So here, my answer is already in percent form, because really what I'm saying right over here, I'm solving for the letter P. So really what I'm saying, grade 7, I end up with the letter P is 40 out of 100, which is 40%. So those are the two examples for finding percent. Now we're basically going to do the same thing with an equation and a proportion, but now we're going to find the whole number using an equation. So again, here we have a question. 80% of what number is 480? So the percent's always easy to identify because it literally tells you. But now we need to ask ourselves, are we finding the whole or the part? Now obviously we're finding the whole because I just told you that on my highlighting up there. But again, look for that is. 80% is equal to 480. This is our part. So I want to find my whole. The whole is what I don't know. So I go to my equation and I fill in what I know. I know 480 is the part. And then I know the percent is 80. Now grade 7, anytime you're working with an equation, that's when your percent needs to be converted to a decimal in order to work with it. So 80% is a decimal. Remember, when you go from percent to decimal, you divide by 100, so your decimal place moves over to the left. So I'm going to represent my percent as a decimal times my whole. Well, I don't know what my whole is. That's what I'm trying to find. So again, I get 480 equals, maybe we like writing it better like this, 0.8 W. So even though we're working with a decimal, don't be scared. Same rules apply. What's happening to W? It's being multiplied by 0.8. What's the opposite? Divide. That cancels out. What you do to one side, you must do to the other. So now grade 7, we have 480. divided by 0.8. So let's do some long division. Remember, number on top goes in the box. I'm going to keep saying it because this is a common mistake. Now, remember, when we have a decimal over here, we cannot have that. So what we're going to do instead is we're actually going to move that decimal over to get rid of it. But if you move it over on one number, you need to do it on the other. So basically what I'm doing, grade 7, is I'm multiplying each of these by 10. So what I end up with is 8 into 4,800. You see that? So it's okay to have a decimal in the box, but not outside the box. So I get rid of it by multiplying both sides by 10. It's still going to give me the same answer. So now I go 8 goes into 4 0 times, 8 goes into 48 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. Bring down my zeros. And I get the answer of the whole is 600. Now, again, grade 7, always go back to the question and just use some mental math. Does that make sense? If my whole number is 600, does it make sense that 80% of it, so over half, but not quite 100%, is 480? Yes, that does make sense. If you ended up that your whole number was like 60,000, you would be able to think to yourself, that doesn't make sense that 480 would be 80% of 60,000. Okay, so that was using an equation. Now let's use a proportion. All right, 75% of what number is 300? So again, label the parts you're working with. We have percent, and then this is my part, okay? 75% is 300, which means I need to find my whole. So I'm going to plug in what I know. I know that my part is 300. I don't know the whole, so I'm going to leave a W. I do know the percent. Now, before in equations, remember, I said over here, when you're working with an equation, the percent is a decimal. When we're working with a proportion, we're always going to write that percent as a number out of 100. Again, it all means the same thing. It's just setting it up in a different way. Because I'm working with a proportion, I'm going to do cross products. So I get 75W equals 300 times 100. So 3 times 1 is 3. And then I'm going to add my 4 zeros. So 30,000. I want to get W all by itself. I want to isolate that variable. So I divide by 75. Cancels out, which you do to one side, you must do the other. So now I get 30,000 divided by 75. So I'm going to go over here. Number on top goes in the box. All right, 75 does not fit into 3. It does not fit into 30, but it does fit into 300. I believe it fits in 4 times, if my mental math is correct. 4 times 75 is 300. And then I'm just going to extend. Obviously, I can keep going, but it goes in 0, 0. So I get that my whole is 400. So I'm basically saying, grade 7, if I had $400 and I'm going to give you 75% of it, does it make sense that I'm going to give you 300? Yes, because that is actually 3/4. So again, grade 7, I'm just saying always go back to the question and go, okay, does that actually kind of make sense? All right, now the hardest part of your lesson, grade 7, is going to be deciding if you are looking for the part, the percent, or whole. So I'm just going to go over a few examples of questions you might come across. What do you need to figure out? Because sometimes you need to find the part, even though this lesson focused on percent or whole. So let's take a look at the first question. What is 45% of 65? Well, obviously we already had the percent. The biggest question is really the part or the whole. So we're looking for that is, but we want to know what is 45% of 65. I have 65, so that's going to be my whole. But remember, what is? That is connects my part and my percent. So in this case, I need to figure out what's the part. What about this one? 40 is 60% of what number? So again, here's my percent. That's easy enough. Now let's decide my part or whole. So that is connecting. I'm saying 40, let's say $40 is 60%. So this is my part. Of what number? My whole. Okay, so I'm basically saying 40 is equal to 60%, but really out of what? Now look at this one. This one should be pretty straightforward. 455 is what percent of 75? So here, it should be pretty straightforward that I'm actually looking for the percent because it's saying what percent. But now notice, look for that is to find the part. It's not always the smaller number that's the part, because look at this. It's saying 455 is what percent of 75. So 75 is actually my whole. So in grade 7, when your part is bigger than your whole, that actually tells you your percent is going to be bigger than 100. All right, last one. 80% of what number is 200? So again, we have my percent, but I need to find the part or the whole. So 80% is, there's my keyword, 200. That means this is my part, and I'm looking for my whole. Okay? So make sure when you're doing your work that you clearly identify in your head which is the part, which is the percent, which is the whole. This can be a very tricky lesson, so work at it carefully and give me a call or chat with me if you get stuck. I hope you have a great day.